Pokemon trading card game even harder to resist. Neo Genesis. You can master the game.
With the release of Neo Genesis in late 2000, players and Wizards of the Coast alike thought the game was saved, thanks to the introduction of baby Pokemon like Cleffa that slowed down the game and finally provided an out to the Rocket handlock. But a savior the set would not be. If you watched our last video, you'll know that Wizards mistranslated Slowking, allowing its Mind Games power to work from anywhere on the board, not just in the active spot like its Japanese print, creating one of the strongest trainer floodgates in the game's history. Pokemon was once again devolving into degeneracy. Basic powerhouses were ruling the day, backed by Slowking and strong trainers still around from the game's base era. Something needed to change, and for once, Wizards had the solution. No, this isn't part 2 of Prop 15.3's story. This is the birth of the annual set rotation. I'm the Ruby Retro Historian, and this is the story of how evolutions finally gained their footing in the Pokemon trading card game. The Pokemon TCG had a bumpy start to 2001. After concluding the East Coast Super Trainer Showdown, Wizards of the Coast knew that Prop 15 was a failure. Limiting trainer cards to 15 and then only allowing a max of 3 copies of any one card, well, it just didn't solve many of the issues plaguing the fledgling game. The same Pokemon from base set and jungle dominated, and now, players had even less trainers to keep up with them. Though several solutions to the problematic Generation 1 cards were released in Neo Genesis, those alone did not fix the game's balance issues. However, this would be the least of many players' worries. In February, during one of Wizards' weekly online chats with the player base, the details of the next STS were announced, with the event taking place on June 23rd and 24th in Secaucus, New Jersey. But the qualifiers would only allow players 14 and under to compete. Wizards was doing away with the 15 and up division entirely for competitive play. This spurred a community outcry, with players demanding that Wizards reinstate the older age division. During the first March chat, the structure was announced for the upcoming STS, with Ash's Honor Championship open to players 10 and under, Rocket's Foolproof Plan Championship for players 11 to 14, and the Professor Oak's Revenge Championship for players 15 and up. The older age division was back, with a fitting tournament name too, and the event would even feature a banner with only fossil Pokemon on it for the 15 and up division play area. Good one, guys. A division of literal fossils. Though Wizards would not be issuing travel awards to those 15 and up at the qualifiers, they wouldn't be doing away with their division. Well, not yet anyways. That would come soon enough, but for now, these players were safe. Changes to the qualifiers were also announced. No one actually needed to qualify this time. Players 14 and under could just participate to try and win a free trip, and players of all ages could compete for booster packs. This had the unintended effect of players showing up to the STS who didn't even know how to play the game, but how better to get started than right at the top level of competition? To put that into perspective for modern players, that would be like playing the North American International Championship as your first tournament. Anyways, additionally, players who achieved enough points via Wizards' ELO ranking system could earn buys for up to 3 rounds at the STS. So this was also another incentive for those 15 and up to play at the qualifiers. But that wasn't the only change made. Because the event was scheduled for 2 days instead of 1, it would actually consist of 2 different tournaments, with each age division having a Saturday and Sunday tournament. The winner of Saturday's tournaments couldn't compete in Sundays, but this provided more players the opportunity to take home the title and incredible new medals featuring Scizor. But still, even more changes were coming. In the middle of April, during Slowking's dominance of the base to Neo format, Wizards announced that the format for the upcoming STS would only permit players to use cards released in Team Rocket, Gym Heroes, Gym Challenge, and Neo Genesis, and players could also use all promotional cards that had been released. Well, besides Ancient Mew and Birthday Pikachu. Mew is pretty obvious given its different card back, but why Pikachu? Well, because you couldn't actually prove that it was your birthday when you used its birthday surprise attack. I guess Wizards wasn't planning to check IDs during matches. Though the qualifiers would still use the unlimited format, base set, jungle, fossil, and base set 2 cards would all be rotated out of competitive play to create the new modified format for use at the STS. Thus, the annual set rotation was born. It was Wizards' hope that with the removal of the broken base set trainers, a better competitive environment could be fostered. Taking this one step further, Wizards also banned Sneasel from Neo Genesis, concerned that the lack of energy removal cards in Modified would ensure its dominance of the new format. Additionally, the upcoming Neo Discovery set, which would be released just before the STS, wouldn't be legal for tournament play, to ensure players didn't struggle to obtain the set's new cards. Wizards had done just about everything they could to create a new, healthy format. Now, only time would tell if it would come to pass. Pokémon finally seemed like it was trending in the right direction, even if Wizards would still not issue an erratum for Slowking. With the rotation going through, Stage 2 evolutions were finally primed to make a run. But before we break down the new meta landscape, let's take a moment to remember all the cards lost in the first ever rotation. From base set alone, losses included Blastoise, Chansey, Electabuzz, Computer Search, Item Finder, Lass, Pokemon Breeder, Super Energy Removal, Plus Power, Bill, Energy Removal, Gust of Wind, Double Colorless Energy, and of course the ever-present Professor Oak. From Jungle, we bid farewell to Clefable, Scyther, and Wigglytuff. And from Fossil, we say adios to Aerodactyl, Ditto, and Muck. Also of note, this would be the only time that competitive formats would exist without Switch being legal, which would not see another printing until the fall of 2002. The format was all double gusts and warp points now. But enough of me yearning for the cards of 1999, let's take a look at how the new Team Rocket On meta developed ahead of the STS. Professor Oak was out, and Professor Elm was clearly in. Double Gust was clearly another staple of the meta, but how would the rest of players' deck lists shape up? In speaking with players who prepared and participated in the STS, clear trends emerged. The meta boiled down to what we'll refer to as the Big Three: Riptide Feraligatr, Slowking variants, and Big Fire. To learn more about these archetypes, we have a few friends to help us out, and I'm going to hand it over to the first one now. Riley, tell us all about the Gator.
What's going on, everyone? My name is Riley Wren, and I'm here to talk to you about a powerful Neo-era deck, Feraligatr. Feraligatr decks ran tons of trainer cards like Misty's Wrath and Secret Mission to churn through your deck before announcing Riptide, an attack powered by the amount of water energy in a player's discard pile. And if that wasn't enough, Feraligatr even had the Downpour ability to discard water energies from your hand and power its attack. Comboing with the previously unplayed Trash Exchange, this deck could easily refill its discard pile with water energy while also ensuring you never ran out of trainer resources. Sometimes all a player needed to run their opponent off the table was a single Feraligatr, but with some lucky coin flips, even Totodile could take knockouts on low HP baby Pokemon. Even Croconaw could threaten knockouts with its Sweep Away attack, which, oh yeah, could also mill water energy to power up your Riptide attack. With all this power going for it, Feraligatr was completely primed to rule the format. At least until this next deck had something to say about it. Thanks so much to Ruby Retro for letting me stop by. Now, I'll turn things over to the Hall-On Phantom.
Thanks, Riley, and thanks to Ruby Retro for having me. Okay, like Riley said, I am the Hall-On Phantom, and for today's video, I'm going to be talking about everyone's favorite Neo card, Slowking. Because it was ruled to be played as printed, Slowking continued to be a dominant force in the metagame, stifling Feraligatr's trainer cards and controlling the pace of play. And as a trainer floodgate, it was way better than Dark Vileplume, as it only affected the opponent, and it was only a stage 1 Pokemon, meaning that Slowking decks had plenty of space to fill with other powerful Pokemon, like Rocket Zapdos, one of the most feared basic Pokemon going into the tournament, Steelix, which can now more easily load up on Metal Energy cards thanks to the rotation of the energy removal cards, and the dreaded Murkrow with its mean look attack, which could lock useless Pokemon in the active spot and snipe the opponent's bench with feint attack. Slowking had plenty going for it, and it was the only deck that could reliably take down Feraligatr, but it would struggle against the other top deck of the format, Big Fire. Okay, that's gonna do it for me for today. Thanks again to Ruby Retro for inviting me, and now let's hand the mic over to Shuckle TCG to talk about an archetype that straight flames, Big Fire.
Thanks, Holland Phantom. I'm Shuckle TCG, and today I'm here to talk about one thing, and one thing only, and that is Big Fire. Now, Big Fire had a lot of variety within the archetype, but most deck lists settled into running some combination of Fire Recharge Typhlosion and Blaine's Pokemon. Fire Recharge allowed Big Fire to do something that most decks couldn't do at the time, which was reliably accelerate energy and rely on your late game board state. It was even a stackable Pokemon power if you had multiple Typhlosion in play. Feraligatr was dependent on trainer cards for the entire game, which made it pretty easy pickings for Slowking. But not Big Fire. No, not Big Fire. Typhlosion could reliably cycle those fire energy onto attackers like Blaine's Arcanine to continuously attack with Firestorm for 120 damage. Because the deck ran Blaine cards, you could also use all of that great Blaine support from the Gym era. Though Cinnabar City Gym couldn't do much in the face of Riptide's massive damage output, it did stop other water decks, and it served as a counter for Chaos Gym. Blaine gave you the ability to attach 2 fire energy to any of your Blaine's Pokemon, giving Big Fire some early game pressure in addition to its late game presence. It also meant that you weren't completely reliant on Typhlosion's Fire Recharge and those coin flips, to accelerate your fire energy. Huge thanks to Ruby Retro for having me stop by. I'm gonna pass it back to them now.
Hey, thanks everyone. If you haven't seen any of Riley's, The Hole in Phantoms, or Shuckle TCG's content, I cannot recommend it enough. Links to their channels are in the description below. Each of them has tons of retro content spanning the game's entire history, so you definitely don't want to miss out.
Hello, trainer. It looks like you have an email. Let me just open that for you. Oh god, no, it's a phishing attack. It may hack. Please help me, please help me.
Thanks to our friends, we now have a pretty good understanding of the Big Three, but that's not to say they were the only plays for the tournament. Testing groups scoured the reduced card pool for counters to the main decks. Some of these counters took the form of tech Pokemon, like Brock's Mankey, to trap Slowking active, and Clefairy to play around Murkrow mean-looking your Cleffa. More offensive options included Erica's Bellsprout and Giovanni's Nidoran female to capitalize on Totodile's grass weakness. Most splashable was Wooper with its Amnesia attack that could be used for a single Rainbow Energy. In a format where many heavy retreating Pokemon only had a power and 1 attack, Amnesia could completely lock your opponent out from attacking that turn. More useful was Wooper's Lightning Resistance, meaning it could use Amnesia against Rocket Zapdos to make it forget Electro Burn, so then it could only use Plasma for 0 damage, essentially making Zapdos useless. Because of this, Wooper was an easy inclusion in many Feraligatr and Slowking decks. Other players decided to try and counter the anticipated meta outright, running decks to take advantage of the Big Three's weaknesses. Recognizing the weakness of Feraligatr to Slowking and Steelix's obvious weakness to Fire, Daniel Deardoff played his anti-meta Blaine's Arcanine Slowking deck to a top 8 finish on day 1 of play. Bruce Long also made top 8 in the 15 and up age division with his Erica's Victory Bell deck that could both hit for weakness against Riptide, as well as trap useless Pokemon active thanks to Fragrance Trap and Mean Look. With the consistency of Erica's maids to search for his evolutionary lines and 4 counts of almost all important cards in his deck, it's easy to see why Bruce performs so well. I'd also note that Bruce, who's now 76, is probably the oldest player to top an STS, which definitely runs counter to Wizards casting Pokemon as a children's trading card game. I want to give a huge thanks to Bruce for digging out his old hard drive just to provide us with his list. Despite the strong finishes by Daniel and Bruce, other anti-meta players were less successful. 2 anti-meta decks that placed in the top 64 include David Houseneck's Steelix deck featuring Misty's Dugong to try and cover its problematic weakness to fire, as well as Ryan DeLaurentis' Water Power deck featuring heavy counts of Misty's Pokemon to try and take advantage of Big Fire's presence in the metagame. Notably, Ryan's deck runs no baby Pokemon, instead opting only to run basics that could become his deck's main attackers. Even though he failed to place Day 1, Stephen Lewin's Dark Raichu Steelix deck is certainly a fun list to look at, given the use of the iconic Dark Raichu as its main attacker, as well as the inclusion of the seldom-seen Berry and Master Ball. If I had to guess, the strategy here was to weaken the opponent's bench using Dark Raichu, and then use Steelix's weaker attacks to deliver the finishing blow. Another interesting concept comes to us from Future Worlds runner-up Jimmy Ballard, playing a deck that could hit the big 3 all around for weakness, featuring Erica's Victory Bell, Dark Golduck, and Energy Absorption Mewtwo. Unfortunately for us, his list is lost to time, but it certainly is an interesting concept cramming all 3 of these anti-meta forces into one deck. While many players were experimenting with rogue builds like Jimmy, other players simply stuck to what had worked well in the past, decks with an emphasis on big basics, like Adrian Cameron's Top 32 Alakazam Mewtwo deck. Sure, the deck contained evolutions in the form of Sabrina's Alakazam, but clearly Mewtwo was intended to be the star, given the heavy count of the resource-burning Misty's Wrath. The elusive Rocket's Mewtwo also makes an appearance as another basic attacker. As a backup option, Adrian ran Sabrina's ESP to try and take advantage of Kadabra's Life Drain attack to leave big attackers like a fully powered-up Steelix with only 10 HP remaining. Well, that is if you could hit a heads. Macy finished in the top 16 Day 1, running a deck featuring only Rocket Zapdos and Steelix, as well as a plethora of trainer cards to make up for the lack of other Pokemon. Still running less meta-relevant cards like Sneak Attack and Eco Gym clearly did not hinder their play. One interesting card to point out is Brock, as an additional healing card alongside a max count of gold berries. Macy must have really had to dig deep into their binder to find that Brock card. I can't even think of another deck from the era that would even consider using it. But enough of looking at these other decks, we want to know the answer to the real question. How did the Big 3 perform on Day 1 of the Super Trainer Showdown? Well, in a surprise to almost no one, they completely dominated. While we don't have the complete breakdown of archetypes for the top 8 in every age division, from the results we do have, the Big 3 occupied almost every top 8 slot, with Southern California players leading the way, winning both older age divisions and occupying many other top spots. Let's start by taking a look at the results of the 15 and up age division. SoCal player Jeremy Borchardt took home the older age division with a Rocket Zapdos Steelix Slowking deck filled with tech Pokemon galore and trainer choices that perfectly predicted the meta. Cards like Secret Mission helped to discard lightning energy to use with Rocket Zapdos Plasma attack, Misty's Wrath helped to thin out useless cards in a matchup before playing an Elm or Eking, and Warp Point helped to move Pokemon brought into the active spot by Taunt, Amnesia Zapdoses, and other mean-looked Pokemon. It's easy to see why Jeremy performed so well, locking Jason Klaczynski out of a needed Professor Elm in top 4 and dominating Chris Fulop's Riptide deck with Electro Burn, taking home the gold Scizor medal and this amazing jacket. In the 11 to 14 age division, another Southern California native, Josh Goldstein, won with his version of Riptide. He won a battle of Totodile Fury Swipes in top 8 and defeated another Riptide deck in top 4 by top-decking Double Gust for game. Yep, before Lysander, Guzma, or Boss top deck for game, you had good old Double Gust to bring it home. In the finals, Josh defeated the top-ranked player in the world, Phil Mondelio, who was running a Slowking Steelix deck featuring Rocket Zapdos, Mewtwo, and Murkrow by taking a KO on one of Phil's Slowking with his Croconon. See, Riley told you the little gators are good. I want to point out that Josh wasn't even running Focus Bands, instead opting for Gold Berries, likely to try to win grindier matches against Steelix variants. That said, it definitely hurt him in the mirror. Josh lost his first round of the day to his future top 4 opponent because of a Focus Band flip, and again failed to take an early KO on a Totodile thanks to a heads flip. It was with this tournament that players were beginning to realize that Focus Band was just too good to pass up. Rounding out the representation of the Big Three, we have the 10 and under division, which was won by Paul Lamancusa and his take on Big Fire, defeating future world champion Mindy Lamke's Riptide deck. Paul's deck threw everything we thought we knew about Big Fire out the window, opting for a straight Blaine's build, even running the seldom seen Rapidash and Kangaskhan. I've gotta say, Kangaskhan is definitely an interesting inclusion, given it has one of the worst attacks of all time, Child's Punch, that fails if you lose a coin flip. Yeah, a colorless attack for 10 with a coin flip, you love to see it, especially in the era of baby and Focus Band flips. Yikes. Regardless, with 4 Blaines and plenty of draw, it's easy to imagine Paul running his opponents off the table in the game's early turns. And with that, Saturday was over, but the Super Trainer Showdown sure wasn't. Players had the evening to prepare their decks for Day 2, keeping the results of Day 1 in mind, and there was definitely a shift towards Feraligatr. You either played it or you countered it. Day 2 would see players like previous STS champions Tom Hanley and Rudy Rodriguez pilot the deck to top 8 finishes, with Hanley taking home his second STS crown. While we don't have Tom's list or much other information about the 15 and up division's top 8, we know that much of the top cut matches were between Gator and Big Fire. After a top 4 run the previous day, Jason Klaczynski took second with almost the exact same Typhlosion Arcanine list he ran the previous day, saying if it ain't broke, well, don't fix it. He opted to run Giovanni's Nidoran Female in an attempt to take early KOs on Totodiles against Riptide, and Brock's Mankey to trap Slowking active. Because he ran Metal Energy to protect himself from recoil damage from Arcanine's Heat Tackle, he opted to run Focus Bands over Gold Berries, likely to try and avoid losing Pokemon outright to Riptide. He ultimately lost in the finals because, like me playing this format, he flipped a whopping 6 tails when trying to KO Tom's Cleffa. Meanwhile, Tom had no Gators in play, so he was just eking to try to avoid deck out. After almost a dozen baby flips between Cleffas and Tom's Elekid, Tom finally hit a heads-on Playful Punch to take the KO on Jason's Cleffa, after Jason failed 3 more times to win with his own Arcanine. Who needs Feraligatrs anyways when you have baby flips on your side? Bruce Long made another top 8 appearance with a straight Arcanine build, attempting to hit fast Firestorms and run over his opponents in the early game. He even ran Elekid to place additional damage on his opponent's board on turn 1 in case he decided not to eek. I really like the combination of Blaine and Super Energy Retrieval in his list to refill his hand with energy before turboing them into play. Unfortunately, because he only ran Cinnabar City Gym as a check to Gator, he lost to Tom Hanley in top 8, noting in his report that he wished he still had his victory bells from the previous day to hit all those pesky Gators for weakness. From the results we do have for the 11 to 14 division's top 8, the Big 3 once again dominated, with Big Fire having the largest showing. Division winner Tom Lisagang's list is probably one of the most interesting of the tournament, running only Typhlosion and instead filling out the rest of the deck with anti-meta choices based on the results of the previous day. He ran Murkrows and Darkness Energy to try and trap threats active, as well as Erica's Bellsprout to use Careless Tackle with Darkness Energy's damage boosting effect against Totodiles for a one-hit KO. He also ran the Little Seen Team Rocket Porygon for Conversion 1 to change weaknesses around on heavy retreating Pokemon to make it easier to take KOs. Other fun inclusions by Tom are Sneak Attack and Imposter Oak's Revenge to try and pull ahead early, and Sabrina's Psychic Control to attempt to use powerful trainers his opponent had already played. This card functioned as both an extra Elm or Double Gust if he was able to hit heads. Also, fun fact, Sabrina's Psychic Control is the only card to mention plus power by name, which wasn't even legal anymore for this tournament, but I digress. Tom was victorious over Aaron Gerardo's Riptide deck in the finals. Aaron used Secret Mission to discard his entire hand, only to find a Magby so he wouldn't immediately be benched out when his active was KO'd. Looking at his list, it's pretty incredible he discarded 7 cards with Secret Mission and didn't find a single playable card or another Pokemon besides Magby. Aaron was still running Goldberry instead of Focus Bands, but in this matchup, it really didn't matter. Another interesting choice includes only running 3 Trash Exchange instead of 4 and Misty's Tears to discard a Water Energy in exchange for 2 more Water Energies that you could discard with Downpour. Lastly, heading on over to the 10 and under division, Jonathan Brooks won a second STS with his Dark Blastoise Steelix deck. No wonder they call Jonathan the Blastoise Kid. That's back-to-back STS wins with Blastoise. At the time, players had never seen anything like his deck, but in hindsight, it definitely makes sense that he'd want to pair hard-hitting water types with the Fire-weak Steelix. Jonathan would stall with Steelix active while building up Dark Blastoise on the bench, then relying on Double Gust to take cheap prizes and close out the game. He would overcome Mindy Lamkey's Feraligatr deck in the finals, making that her second place finish of that tournament. Unfortunately, we just don't really have any other 10 and under results to look back on, other than Stephanie Borchart's Misty's Dugong deck, but that list is lost to time, along with the rest of the division's meta. But we can't end the video on that note. Going outside of the top 8 in each age division, we get a little bit more variety. Johnny Burton took his Brock Sandslash Dark Dugtrio list to 10th place in the 15 and up age division by forcing poisoned opponents to switch out, then risk being damaged by Dark Dugtrio's Sinkhole power. His trainer line harkens back to the days of the gym era, running max counts of Erica to fly through his deck to find the pieces to the Rocket Handlock to eliminate his opponent's hand. Unfortunately, Johnny bubbled out of the top 8 despite going 7-2 on the day. Tom Z also finished in the top 16 with a pretty unique take on Big Fire, running Typhlosion with Blaine's Charizard to try and snipe baby Pokemon off the bench with Charizard's Flame Jet attack. Remember, the baby power only works when a baby's active, so if some other Pokemon is active, well, they're pretty defenseless on the bench. While Charizard doesn't have the damage potential of Arcanine, it definitely makes up for it by providing more utility options in its pre-evolutions, like Charmander's Kindle attack and Charmeleon's Bonfire attack. Interestingly, he ran baby Pokemon's evolutionary forms, probably to get around a Murkrow lock, but Clefairy seems like it would be better to include here because at least Elekid and Magby can deal damage later in the game. Other fun Day 2 lists include Tommy Hickman's Misty's Poliwhirl deck, running the seldom seen Misty card to pump up the damage of his Poliwhirl, as well as Berry for more healing. Poliwhirl is a fun card because, besides Feraligatr, it was one of the few cards of the era that could dish out unlimited damage with its Water Punch attack. Additionally, because it cost only colorless energy, it could take advantage of the damage buff provided by darkness energy. John Chimento played a Giovanni's Machamp deck to try and take advantage of the synergy of Machamp's Fortitude power and Focus Band to force his opponents to win 2 coin flips just to take a single KO. Because there was no official ruling on what activated first, John would announce Fortitude first to try and preserve his Focus Bands, only needing to roll for those if he lost the Fortitude flip. While Machamp's Hurricane Punch was also luck-based, it was definitely a frightening prospect for any deck to run into. If he hit 4 heads, he was definitely taking a KO on whatever was active. Ultimately, neither one of these decks could stand up to the power of the Big Three. Even with the conclusion of Day 2, the weekend wasn't over just yet. Wizards staff organized an invite-only tournament after the tournament that was deemed the Maple Bar Invitational 2. Yeah, sorry guys, apparently we missed the first one, but don't worry, we got plenty of deets on the sequel. The Invitational was an unofficial booster draft tournament hosted by Wizards employees featuring cards from the new Neo Discovery expansion and other sets, taking place on Sunday night at the conclusion of the STS. Only specific competitors and judging staff were invited, with attendees including Bruce Long and Jeremy Borchardt. all participating players received a special promo card called the Maple Bar Confrontational, created by Pokemon Zeo moderator Purity, and it's just so fun to look at. Pokemon Zeo was another site like Pojo during the Neo era of the game that, thanks to resources like Jeremy Borchardt, I was able to find via the Wayback Machine. While we don't have the results of the Invitational, from the pictures alone, it looks like it was a ton of fun and filled with plenty of underutilized Neo Pokemon. Across the tournament's 2 days of play, more than 1,600 competitors participated at the New Jersey STS, making this the high point for the Wizards era. That said, players were pretty split on the format. Some top-level competitors, like Jason Klasinski, were still displeased about the state of the game, frustrated by the overwhelming importance of coin flips and finding double gusts. They were also concerned by the fact that Feraligatr was beginning to have such a dominant presence in the metagame. In fact, coin flips were so prevalent during the Wizards era, they began allowing players to use third-party electronic coin flip devices, like this Electro Flip, to speed up play, so the argument against coin flips definitely had some merit. Still, other players were happy that evolutions were finally out of their binders and in their deck boxes, able to compete for the gold. Wherever each individual competitor stood, attendance would only decrease from here until Nintendo took over the game in the summer of 2003. So players, especially players 15 and up, they'd have to enjoy tournaments like these while they lasted. I want to thank you so much for joining us as we look back at the final STS to occur in Secaucus. From here, we look ahead to the final Super Trainer Showdown ever, which would see the tournament return to California and introduce 2 new sets to the tournament format, Neo Discovery and Neo Revelation. Players leaving the New Jersey STS were convinced that Feraligatr was the best deck in the format, and that while the other members of the Big Three were viable, they paled in comparison to Riptide. But would the cards in Neo Discovery or Neo Revelation provide any answers to overcome the dominance of the Big Three? That, my friends, is a story for next time. If you enjoyed our look back at the New Jersey STS, be sure to like and subscribe so we know you're enjoying the history of the game that we all know and love. We have a Patreon where for a few dollars a month, you can receive sneak peeks of new videos and even early releases. You can also catch Aaron and I in the Ruby Retro Discord server. We'd love to chat with you more about anything and everything retro Pokemon. Also, I cannot thank enough the people that we reached out to try and fill in the gaps from this event. If you think information on the results is lacking now, believe me, we filled in a lot of spots on those top 8 brackets. I especially want to take a moment to thank those who contributed photos of the event to the video. Bruce Long, Jeremy Borchardt, John Latham, Michael Martin, and Mindy Meldrum. It's their memories and pictures that make videos like this possible, and for that, we are forever grateful. This is the Ruby Retro Historian signing out and looking ahead to the final Super Trainer Showdown.